Alright. Sorry, I've been doing some voice acting work today. I'm gonna be blunt. I don't have much to talk about in this episode. I know some of you like me to summarize this at the beginning. So here's the summary. Janeway dies, but then she doesn't. The end. You may think I'm being facetious. Every now and again I'll look at a work and I'll say, well, there's nothing to talk about there. And it's hard to explain what I mean by that. It's basically there's nothing to analyze. It's like analyzing a sheet of paper. No, okay, that's a bad way. It's analyzing what's on a blank sheet of paper. In other words, nothing. There's nothing there. So I have analyzed it. I don't know where to go with that. And sometimes I'm asked to do that anyway, so I start talking about the paper, because I don't know what else to talk about. It's like, well, okay, there's this paper, and it's the... I have nothing to talk about with Coda, except for the paper it's written on. So I hope you'll forgive my indulgence. But that's what this episode's going to be like. Now, here's an interesting thought. Actually, I think I'll do that. Okay. So, we've been having some awesome Voyager lately. We've had Future's End, Warlord, Macrocosm, Fair Trade, and Alter Ego back to back to back. With this strange Q-like episode, I think is in there, but I usually skip that, so we're just not going to count that. Oh, awesome. Yeah, this is great. Voyager's finally being fun and enjoyable to watch. Had to end sometime. Ugh, this episode. I'm going to be blunt. I just want to speak to Jerry Taylor directly. Okay. Dear Jerry Taylor, we get it. She's awesome. And female. These things are evident and self-apparent. You can stop jamming them down our throats. Thank you. Sincerely, Archie and Gaia. P.S. I like it when you actually do good stuff later on in the series. She does. Jerry Taylor actually does some great stuff towards the end of this series. It's just early on, it's like, ah! But that's kind of what I want to talk about, isn't it? Here's the thing. I do not have much to talk about about this episode. I really don't. I'm going to try something new, though. Brand new. I'm going to go ahead and try to do a rewrite without having done any prep work. In other words, this is everything you're about to hear about my rewrite, which I'll actually be doing at the end here, is all just top of my head because I want to demonstrate something. I'll talk about that in a moment. Before I get into my main discussion, though, I want to mention something. Kate Mulgrew did not care for this episode. Think about that for a moment when I start discussing what this episode is and the fact that this is clearly a Janeway episode. Now, she didn't actually come out and say, I disliked the episode. What she said was code speak in Hollywood terms for nobody liked this episode. But usually when someone in Hollywood says that, what they mean is they didn't like it, and therefore either assume or presume that others do not. So I'm reading into her statement, in case you're wondering. And I freely admit that. The term Mary Sue is thrown around a little bit too much. Let's go ahead and work this out here. If you've followed me for any length of time on my videos or my streams, you know that I'm actually kind of an opponent of definitions. Because most of the time, definitions simply cannot be sufficiently in-depth in order to actually describe something. I usually think of definitions as the beginning of a description rather than the end-all be-all that some people do. So I try to be very specific when I use terms such as Mary Sue or hack or good writing, bad writing, etc. Things with regards to production, especially on a show. I'm not always successful in that, but I do try. But the point I'm reaching here is that there is no denying Catherine Janeway is a Mary Sue in this episode, and this is not the first time it's come up. I've mentioned before that I talk about the Janeway Mary Sue thing in extensiveness. This is that episode. This is the Mary Sue discussion in its totality. This will probably be the last time it really comes up, because by memory, this is the last time that this happens. From now on, they'll actually start treating Janeway as a character, at least for the most part. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's define Mary Sue here, shall we? This is why I think definitions are kind of silly. It's like the word anime or the word video game. I know that's 2 words. Those are definitions, but by their very nature, they are so vague as to basically only serve to, like, chop off a colossally huge category from other colossally huge categories. That's okay, but my point is, that's one of the problems with definitions to begin with. There are so many exceptions, so many gray areas, so many in-betweens, blah, 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 blah. Let's just move on with this. When you really boil down to it, a Mary Sue is best defined as someone the audience does not like. Now, I know some people can take issue with that, and I'll talk about this in extensiveness, but that really is what it boils down to, because let's be honest, with the exception of parodies or other humorous works, no one really sits down and says, I'm going to write a Mary Sue character. Well, quite the contrary. Most people who write Mary Sue characters write them with the intent of saying, this character is going to be awesome, or I want to make a character that the audience likes. And it turns into a Mary Sue. So we can't actually use the intent of creation as a means of definition, can we? Now, I do have an answer for this whole how we specifically define it past character that, the audience does not care for. But I do think that the definition of Mary Sue is, by its nature, something that also covers a broad spectrum. I'm going to pull out 3 of the most important ones, I think, here. 3 of the most important points of being a Mary Sue character. Number 1, a Mary Sue character wins. They're either smarter or better, or they can technobabble their way out, or the universe rearranges itself so that they're right. This has actually happened in Voyager several times with Janeway, actually. Or maybe they're just flat out stronger than everyone else, just plain more powerful. And I'm sure that as I use these words to define this generalization, you can think of several characters across fiction that you're like, yeah, that describes, so-and-so. Second big one is they are well-liked. Whatever it is, this character is just beloved by everyone, No matter who they encounter, they automatically get along with everyone, and there's friendship, and not just friendship, it goes past that, adoration. People actually enjoy being in this person's presence. They don't merely tolerate them, or they don't merely accept them. They want to be around them. They heap adulation upon their feet. I'm sure you can think of several examples of this as well. And then we have my third one, which is they are perfect. This one is last because it will take the most discussion, but, they don't have drama, or personal problems, or some kind of health disfigurement that makes it so that their skin is unsightly, and they don't have any speech impediments, they don't have any secret fears or nervousness. Even, their great they're the horrible thing that they're so ashamed of is their skin glimmers like diamonds. Yeah, I'm calling you out on that one. But the point being, they're just perfect little creatures. And again, I'm sure that you can think of plenty of examples of that, without going to the one I mentioned directly there. Here's what it all boils down to, for me. A Mary Sue character cheated. I'll let you process that for a moment. Here's the thing that I have said a few trillion times. I have talked with so many people, fledgling writers, existing writers, burgeoning writers. Many of my own viewers have come to me and said that I've helped them with their writing careers through my streams and discussions thereof. I've actually done classes and lessons on creative writing. The most common problem I see across all of that, across 2 decades of that work, is lack of patience. Sometimes it's lack of skill, but it manifests the same way. I'll get to that. This is what I mean by the character cheats. It's not the fact that the character is winning so much, for example. The fact that the character is winning these battles because they're just so much better than everyone else. Show the backstory. Lead up to that. Build up to that. Make that character earn those victories. Show a character who wins by incredible tactical genius, and then show them making a mistake and never even realizing it. Show them behind the scenes, frantically researching and shoving themselves stressed to hell and back as they try to discover every single possible exploit of weakness they can in all of their enemies. Constantly working and striving just to keep up, just to maintain the status quo, so that when they're out in the field, when they're out and they're on their bridge or in the battle or whatever, or they're actually, this can be a sports thing, it doesn't have to be necessarily combative, they just win And they show themselves as winning because they managed their strategy, or they got lucky, or circumstance happened, and they maintain that facade because they have to. They lose that facade for even a second. They lose everything. They lose all of the mystique and political prestige that comes with being the person who wins, with being the perfect tactician. Think about Grand Admiral Thrawn for a second, and how many mistakes he made, and how human he was presented as, especially later. Think about that kind of a character. Now, I wouldn't define that kind of a character as a Mary Sue, but the reason is because you showed your work. Let's talk about the well-liked character. How about have someone encounter them that doesn't like them, or hates them, or just doesn't get along with them? It's nothing personal. I don't like you, you don't like me, and I don't want to be your friend, to paraphrase. Show those characters interacting over a long period of time. Have several events happen. Build up. Slow boil. Gradual. Get it to the point where they can tolerate each other, where they've grown accustomed to each other, where they have a working relationship, where they actually consider themselves professionals and co-workers and whatnot. And then if you really want to keep going, you can keep pushing that into actual friendship and camaraderie. Forgive me for pointing it out, but O'Brien and Bashir over on Deep Space Nine are a perfect example of this. At no point in time was Bashir portrayed as a Mary Sue because he earned it. He earned that friendship with O'Brien. He earned the admiration of his peers. He earned all of those things that he achieved. I know. You're arguing, like, well, no, he didn't. He was genetically engineered. My point is, the character, as a character, not in character, distinction, earned it because we saw progression, we saw demonstration, we saw him building up to it. What about the perfect character? What about someone who's just flawless in every way and maintains this thing? Now, the easiest way to subvert this is to simply, or to flesh out a character who is perfect, is to show them that they are not. To show that this is just a facade they present constantly, unendingly, maintaining their dutiful, willful presentation of I am the perfect ideal of what I believe to be perfect, and then show their regime, show the effort and strength they put into that, show the real them underneath that facade, or maybe the real them behind the mask behind the facade, and so forth and so on. There's so much you can do with a perfect character to actually flesh them out and show them earning that so-called perfection. My point in all of this, before I continue on the perfect thing, is the clear distinction between a Mary Sue and a character that people like who has Mary Sue-like qualities, which is why this comes down to personal definition, is this person earned it. This author earned it. This director, this producer, the people involved in producing this work bothered to earn up the point where they could show a character who wins, who is liked, who is perfect. Over here, we're just given a label. A stamp is smashed on the screen that says, this, you will like this character, and they will win. And the end. Now, it's understandable why this is the most common mistake I see amongst young writers. There's a reason that the Mary Sue, concept is so attached to fan fiction. Because fan fiction is, by definition, one of the things that most people do as burgeoning writers. Because most people who begin their writing careers don't know how to make up new characters and settings and concepts on their own, so they use existing ones as a leaping off point to grow, to learn. There's nothing wrong with that. I've talked about this before. Now, if you try to, do fan fiction and then do your own works and merge the two together in some kind of overall, setting, that's just crazy. Only a madman would do that. Ugh. But in all seriousness, it's very common for those writers who are so unaccustomed to writing concepts and tropes and ideals and memes to just say, this character is sexy. This character is smart. This character is good at blah. This is actually tied into another problem common to young writers. I call it bullet point syndrome. In other words, a character is an incredibly entangled mass of complexity. A caricature is a few bullet points. And so that's another reason why so many Mary Sues can basically be described by a few bullet points. Describe Janeway as presented in just this episode. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and do it for myself. Incredibly talented, driven, very determined. I'm actually not coming up with any others. Now, before you think I'm picking on Janeway, I want to make this clear. I'm picking on this episode. Janeway has been fleshed out as a character both before this and especially after this, as a fully fledged, entangled mass of complexity. But in this episode, she is just 3 bullet points. That's it. You could add a bullet point, she was well beloved. Or actually, did I already say that? Shoot, I'm actually repeating myself here. Okay, let's add a bullet point, she always is right. There we go. Janeway's always right. Later episodes will actually parody that very concept with 7. Honestly, it's so understandable too, because the patience aspect. Too many young writers want to get straight to the meat of their work, and they don't want to build up to it. Now, how much build-up is necessary, there's no such definition for that. There really isn't. It's always going to be independent based on that exact story you're writing and the people who are going to read it or perceive it or play it or whatever, right? This applies to video games, movies, books, television, anime, comics, everything, right? Fictional work, creative medium. How much time is spent building up is debatable, and it is possible to spend too much time. It is also possible that I know some writers, and I admittedly kind of put myself in this category, who don't know how to write payoff, who only know how to write build-up. I'm actually really, I mean, I've said it before, I'm not really a good writer, to be really blunt. And one of the problems I had most commonly when I was early on is I would build up, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this now. Now, I feel like I've gotten past that phase now, after 20 years of experience, but the point remains. Actually, I guess we're up to 30 years now. Whatever, you get the point. You get the point. The other problem, though, is a lack of skill. I mentioned this earlier. Here's the thing. Let's say you're writing a tactically brilliant commander. It's hard to show your work in how a tactically brilliant commander is tactically brilliant if you, the author, do not know tactics. Now, there's several ways around this. One is you can do the research yourself. I actually like this idea personally. It's something I have done. It's something several other writers have done. But there's another idea, and there's no shame in it. It's called getting help. Go to an actual... There's a reason so many scientific consultants exist in science fiction, because a lot of writers who write science fiction don't actually know science worth beans. And yet they have an entire position whose only job is to look at it and say, well, here, let me help make this work, you know. And I mean, in early Trek, technobabble was exactly that. Before it became just gibberish and nonsense whose purpose is to pad the episode. Early on it was, I need them to technologically, you know, technically tech a solution out of this problem. So here's the setup. And so the science advisor would come in and say, well, we could do this and this and this, and that might work. And then they'd write that into the script. Sometimes it would involve some technobabble, but usually that was just like, well, we need something that alters the mass of an item, and we don't have anything like that in real life, so we need to alter the mass of this to this exact point by blah, 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 and then we'll do this and this and that. You can see how technobabble sort of evolved to become the dominant point of that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, there's plenty of authors who just do not have the skill to show this is a well-liked character. This is a character who wins. This is a character who is perfect. And so either trying to learn how to accommodate that, or trying to learn ways around that, or getting outside help, or just doing the research yourself, all of these are ways to get around this problem. But I said I'd talk about that perfect thing last. Okay. We all... okay, I'm trying to think of where to start with this. I personally dislike it when authors soapbox. I've done it myself in the past. I make a point not to do it anymore. But what I mean by that is an author will present an ideal, an idea, or a concept that they believe in strongly, and they will present it as absolute truth because they're writing a fictional universe where they can make it true. And that usually... Now, you can do that quietly and simply without actually really going overboard, but let's just say that Star Trek tends to not do that about half the time. And some authors have literally just characters got up in their soapbox and said, and this is right, this is wrong, and this is right, this is wrong. And that bugs the crap out of me. Call me strange, but I don't like being told what is right and wrong. I like being able to come up with my own deliberations. It's this... I've got this thing in here that lets me do that. At least I think so. Hang on. Yeah, I think it's still in there. Okay. We're good. All jesting aside, That's basically the biggest problem with doing a perfect character, because it's not a perfect character. It is your definition of a perfect character. Now I can tell what you're about to say. Well, Arsh, what's the definition of perfect? Thank you for bringing that up. There is no definition of perfect. That is actually my point. We have no concept, even if you count every human being who has ever lived, of what perfect actually really is. We have a concept of what it means ideologically, or generically, in other words, the idea of being, optimized in every way, to summarize it in such a definition. But what perfect actually is, the literal, you have this quality, these stats, or these abilities, whatever. We don't know that. We can't. We're not perfect, and we are so distinct from each other that even someone I get along with and am a huge friend with, and I think of 3 people off the top of my head like this, and I would disagree violently on what the definition of a perfect, blah would be. A perfect society, a perfect person, a perfect ship, a perfect future, a perfect career, blah, 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 blah. And so when you are presenting something as perfect, what you are presenting is your idea of what a perfect person is. Forgive me for bringing Star Trek Insurrection to this, but Star Trek Insurrection is especially guilty of this. That's Star Trek 9, for those of you who don't remember subtitles. Or the Fountain of Youth planet, if you prefer. That was the writer, I'm not going to go into names, that can wait, but the writer of that particular episode, of that particular movie, viewed the life the Baku had as perfection. The problem with it is the same thing that's the problem with Season 1 TNG, and a little bit of the original series as well. It was one author, one director, one creator, one producer saying, this is perfection. And therefore, by simply doing so, anything or anyone who disagrees with that is automatically wrong. And the other problem with it is the obvious one, which I already mentioned. In neither case did they earn it. Why are the Baku perfect? They just... At what point are we shown any of that? Are we shown any of the struggle to reach this point? Are we shown any of the gravitas of their transformation, of their abandonment of their planet? Are we shown anything about their culture, their society? No, we are shown nothing. There's a big billboard hanging over the Baku village that says perfection, and we're just supposed to believe it. Season 1 TNG had this exact same problem with the perfect humans. And, well, let's just say that I'll talk about that more when we get to TNG. But we'll go ahead and use the prevalent example here of Janeway. In this episode, Janeway is clearly defined as perfect, and well-liked, and always wins. At no point does she earn any of these things. She just wins because she does. She's just right because she is. The funeral scene is, without question, my most hated scene of this entire episode. I hate it. It is pointless, padding, and it's pointless, it's padded, and it's actually really, really sick when you start actually analyzing it, because this is what Janeway herself is presenting in her own mind. Based on what we understand of the whole, you die and then go into this thing to be our life energy source, fuel. Your mind creates the circumstance you perceive. So for Janeway, her ideal world is one in which she is so adulated as to be practically past adored. That does speak volumes of what could be a character under that. But the problem is, the episode itself is constructed as if Janeway herself was that adulated, that adored, that well-liked. Alright, time to challenge myself. Like I said, I've done very little prep work other than just having watched the episode just now. How would I rewrite Coda? Now, the Imperium storyline's gone, so that's not an option, which is a shame. Coda was on the list of episodes which just wouldn't happen. That means I have to stick with the basic concept of the episode. I've talked before about this problem, identifying what the basic concept of this episode is. You could say it's Janeway dies but then doesn't. Okay. You could say it's an analysis of life after death and the possibility of faith, etc. Okay. You could say it has to do with... I can't think of the word all of a sudden. Skepticism in the face of overwhelming circumstance. But honestly, I'm going to stick with one thing for this episode. I feel like the biggest element of this episode that is important is, what if Captain Janeway died? Now, my first immediate thought I'm already going to throw out the window. It's a little bit too done, and in fact, I think I've already done that before. I'll give you a hint, it has to do with time distortion. Instead, why don't we go with an idea about... And again, this is off the top of my head, no prep work this time, so you get to see me, how terrible of a writer I am when I'm writing on the fly. Why don't we go with an idea about... Recently, we don't find this out to the end of the episode, but recently Voyager has encountered an alien race that goes out of its way to basically identify certain people of potential in a crew, and then replace that person and use that in order to basically hijack the ship and raid it for resources, material, and of course slaves. All right. Now let's say, in the process of them coming by and getting Voyager, Janeway has a bit of an alteration, and what actually happens, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, obviously, but in the episode, we would just see, Janeway dies. And what actually happens is Janeway and Tuvok actually became alerted to this very early on, because Tuvok's actually competent as a security officer, and identified the problem and went ahead and destroyed the fake Janeway. And the reason they keep up this facade of Janeway being dead is actually specifically to ensure that there's no one else on the ship also infiltrating. And for the record, yes, there would be one other person on the ship. And the point is, it would actually be the person who is angling for promotion in the midst of this command restructuring. I'll get to that later. And so we see a crew that has just watched their captain be killed. And obviously that would have a huge effect on morale, but not in the way it's presented in Coda. Or rather for different reasons. I've always felt that Janeway is a distant commander. Indeed, if I can be so blunt, a bad commander. That she's not actually a good captain. In fact, you'll notice I keep calling her commander instead of captain. That's not on purpose, but at the same time it kind of is. I don't think of her as a captain like I do Kirk, like I do Picard, like I do Sisko, who was a captain even before he got that rank. She is more of a commander, but she's more of a backline commander. She is a science officer. She's someone who sits back and can dictate things based on algorithms and cold calculus. And she's alright at that. So she's not that personable with most of the crew. Not yet. So because of that distance, there's no personal, I've lost my best friend from anyone, with the sole exception of Tuvok. I would add in a scene where Tuvok publicly... He doesn't deliver... He delivers a Vulcan eulogy. And I don't know how I would do this exactly, so this is just off the top of my head, but imagine they're at the actual funeral service. Tuvok steps forward, lights a single candle, doesn't say a word, steps back, and lowers his head quietly. And that's his eulogy for Janeway. Something about that strikes me as rather appropriate. Regardless, so they have the funeral service, she's abducted. Everyone is nevertheless rather impacted because one of their crew just got killed in an accident, which serves as a reminder of the circumstance they're in. Janeway might have lived, possibly, if they had been near a starbase or advanced medical facilities. And even if Janeway died, well, that is kind of how service on a starship works, right? You are in a military, after all. But if you're back home, there's such a thing as replacements, reinforcements, shore leave to get away from your service, right? And it just kind of hits everyone with her death that there is no shore leave, there are no reinforcements, there's no help or no assistance. They will keep doing their job until, probably, they die, just like she did. Either from old age or from some accident, because accidents happen. That's just life. And that air of depression would hang over everyone, and people would be in a bit of a malaise throughout the entire episode. And I feel this distinction, I can count on these actors to pull off this subtlety, because it's not we are in a depressed gray atmosphere because our captain died. It's We're in a depressed gray atmosphere because we're in a depressed and gray atmosphere. Everything about this situation is horrible. I would use Coda as an example of just how bad their circumstance really is. So often the crew goes out of their way to try and emphasize, I talked about this very recently, just in Fair Trade. Voyager does have a degree of paradise about it, really, when you get down to it. And yet for these people, and in these circumstances, this is not paradise. And I would, and in contrast to all the other episodes which emphasize the joys, the wonders, the up things, which help keep their morale lifted throughout the journey, this would be a moment in which their morale genuinely dips. Because they just, it's right in their face, bam, this is terrible. And of course there would be one crew member, which, you know, is someone who, I would probably use Vorik in all honesty. But it would be someone who's been a guest star before, that's actually crucial. If I was going to do this properly, you can't just have a random guest star who shows up, and because then everyone in the audience is going to be, well, it's that guy. You have to have someone who's been here before. And that person, you could also have it be one of the main crew members who's been replaced. That's also possible, but you get the point. And the other thing I would emphasize, though, with this episode is Harry Kim. Now, I know we just kind of had a Harry Kim episode, but bear with me. Harry Kim, I feel, is the person who would be most hard hit by this, even more than the Maquis would. Granted, the Maquis are used to freedom and life and the edge and all that, and you know, their freedom of choice and their individuality, etc. But the Maquis are also used to living with what they have and not actually having proper supplies or showers or food. By contrast, Harry Kim is someone who just left Earth. Now, whether or not you agree Voyager is a paradise, Earth is a paradise. There's absolutely no denying this. No crime, no disease, no war. You want to do something, you do it. And it will be fun, because you can do it for fun, and interact with other people who interact with you, and it'll be great. You want to go start up, and I love using this example in Deep Space Nine. You want to be a chef and serve people at a restaurant. Not for money, but because it's what you want to do. So Harry has just left Earth. And he has just left Starfleet Academy. He is literally as fresh and green as it is possible to be. And he is the one who is stuck out here in the worst example and circumstance that... Well, okay, that's a lie. The second worst example and circumstance that Starfleet has ever really encountered. The first would be the Dominion War, by the way. Obviousness. But, of course, the Dominion War hadn't actually started by the time Voyager started. So, yeah. Anyways, literally, I would have Harry sit there and saying... There's nothing worse than this. There's no bright light at the end of the tunnel. There's no, I just have to endure this for one more day. If I keep up my job and do my best, day after day after miserable day, my reward is that someday I will die, having done the same thing forever. Eventually, someone past me might make it home, but it won't be me. I'm reminded of World War Z, actually. The idea of the life, the society after. It's hard to acclimate to that kind of life, especially when you're so used to one that has things like luxuries, like comforts, like personal pursuits. The very idea of something called a hobby is relatively new in human history, because before we didn't have the time to devote to something that's just for our own personal, intellectual, and emotional entertainment. Imagine a life where you have to work a job you hate every day, and it will never get better. That is the perspective I would give on Harry Kim in this episode. And I wouldn't try to take away from that by saying, you know, trying to have a light, happy-hearted ending. They would find, you know, Vorik, whoever, remove him, get rid of him. Pretty sure he's the last one. Janeway would reveal herself. I would have the coda to the episode be Janeway meeting Kim in his quarters. And I would have her walk to him and say, I am so sorry that you have gone through this. And he says, no, you didn't. Okay, you didn't put me through this, Captain. This is just how things are. I'm not sure I want to be on the bridge anymore. And Janeway pauses for a moment and says, I'll understand that if you mean that, but if I see you on that bridge tomorrow morning at 0700 hours, then I am damned proud of you. And then she would leave. Because the point is not that there's a happy ending. The point is not that there's some bright light at the end of the tunnel. The point, if you can forgive me for blunt, about not being a Mary Sue is that just because we fail does not mean we do not deserve to exist. Flawed and human though we be.
Harry's clarinet solo was okay. I could have done without Tuvok's reading of folk and poetry. But the highlight of the evening was definitely Catherine Janeway portraying the dying swan.
I learned that dance when I was 6 years old. I assure you, it was the hit of the beginning ballet class.
I don't doubt it. If Neelix has another talent night, I hope you'll reprise it.
Oh, no. Not until certain other people take their turn. The ship's first officer, for instance.
Me? Get up in front of people and perform? I don't think so.
Come on, Chicote. There must be some talent you have that people would enjoy. Maybe I could stand with an apple on my head and you could phaser it off.
Sounds great. If I miss, I get to be captain.